Hi everyone, I'm Olivia, aka Biblioghoul, and today I thought I would do the first time book tag. Olivia tagged me, and that's the first time I've been tagged, so I was super excited, even though I notoriously have a horrible memory, so I couldn't remember books from my childhood, and I think that this tag is really interesting because I feel like even like a few years ago when I look back at myself, like I don't identify with who I was, and like things are constantly in flux, obviously. And you know, it is nice to see like a person's trajectory and their roots and the books that they enjoyed for the first time. But I'm picking books from all different stages of my life for these answers. So yeah, this tag was created by Getting High With It, so I will link their channel below. So the first category is Sorry Not Sorry, the first book you could not stop gushing about. And I have a few options for this one. As a teenager, that book was definitely the Vampire Academy series. I actually never saw the movie, so let me know if you're a fan and if the movie was actually good. But I just remember seeing like the person they picked for Rose and being like, oh, like that's not how I pictured her at all. And you know, when I was a teenager, I was all about toughness. I really liked movies about like gladiators and the Boondock Saints, because even at a young age I was just interested in justice and honor and whatever. So I've always had like this dream to be like as strong as I could possibly be and train, you know, like Rose in the Vampire Academy. But I've never even done that, you know, in my physical prime. But I did take fencing when I was in college, and you know, I still want to learn how to beat someone up. So that side of me has definitely mellowed out, even though there's still a little fire there. But that book was also definitely important to me in terms of like reading a paranormal series. When I was a kid, I loved things like The Haunted Mansion, but I was also like super terrified of it. So, you know, like as I moved my way like through fear and fascination, and obviously still when I watch horror movies today, I'm a scaredy cat and the fear will always be there. But I think books like these helped me to get through things and really like explore paranormal topics that I was interested in, and which later led to my love of horror. There were also two books in college that became my favorite books at that time, and they exposed me to different things for the first time. One of those books was Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. I think I just loved the way that book was written. And you know, in high school, middle school, when you're reading the required reading, I don't know if there was ever a book as beautifully written as this book. And I think that's sad that I wasn't really exposed to that as well, because I wanted to be a writer when I was a kid. If you've never read it, you know, I know sometimes classics, it can be like, is this book actually good? Should I read it? But this book is amazing. And then another one I read was Citizen by Claudia Rankine. And I read this book when I was first getting exposed to American studies and history, and it made me really understand, you know, what history could be and like the expansiveness of expertise. It has, you know, many forms. It's an American lyric, and so you know, there are some parts of the book that are essays about a specific topic. And oh, I should say that the book overall is a book about Claudia Rankine's experience as a Black woman, with conversations around race, both like with her colleagues and friends, and just like things in the news that she's thinking about. There's a part about Serena Williams and the racism that she faces. And this was one of the earlier books I read that focused on the topic of race, but it's also still like one of the best I've ever read. So yeah, the next category is a book that you wish you had DNF'd. So I think mine would be Wicked, which no hate to that book. That book could be amazing, but I was obsessed with The Wizard of Oz when I was a child, and so people would get me everything related to this topic. Obviously, I wanted to be a writer and I love to read, and I love The Wizard of Oz, so my parents bought me Wicked, and although they screened everything else in my life, they did not with this book. And you know, this book has a lot of adult themes, and I don't remember if there's sex or like what the level of sexual content is, but I just remember like little elementary school me was like pretty scarred by reading this book, and it was like completely different from the musical that I had seen and which I still love. So it was like a loss of innocence moment, but there was no further understanding because it was just in like within the threads of the book and not like actual education. I also just wish I could like unread a lot of the things that I read for school. I'm looking at you, Grapes of Wrath. I hated that book, and I thought that it was such a shame. I literally study American history every day for my job and like what I'm most interested in. The fact that like the one time I had American history, we were learning about like the Dust Bowl and like all of these really bleak moments in American history. Not that I'm not interested in bleak moments in American history, because there are a lot that are really interesting, but I just think that it was so like flat and like didn't come to life at all. And then reading, I don't know how long Grapes of Wrath is, but I feel like I remember it being like super long, and we had to read like a 300-400 page book in a week. This is like a miserable experience within the context, and then also I didn't enjoy the book. So I wish I could, you know, DNF those books and replace them with books like Their Eyes Were Watching God. And, you know, I did have one teacher at the end of, in senior year that was, you know, had us reading books like Frankenstein and, you know, books written by Black authors. I can't really remember which ones now, but I just remember being so happy that there were books that, like, I enjoyed reading. I don't know if you can hear the rain that's in the background of this video, but hopefully if you can, it's just like a nice soothing thing going on here. So the next category is Working Wonders, the first book that helped you through something in your life. I don't know, I mean, I'm sure like books like helped me in little ways, and like it's kind of evident through like all the ways I'm talking about these books in the video, but you know, I interpreted this as like a big thing that's going down in your life that you need help with, and I don't really know if a book has ever like aided me in that way. Like, I still don't know what my favorite book of all time is, because I feel like there's so many books that are my favorites, but they're not like me. So I never read any self-help books because I just thought the way they were marketed were very weird, and I don't know, like there wasn't a lot of that like in my upbringing of like taking care of yourself and yada yada. So I just never read any, and actually like a lot that I did end up reading like now were not helpful. But and especially like I've read a bunch of those spiritual books that everybody loves, like oh god, what is it called? I'll like put some on the screen, and they were just like all right to me. I think books like The Art of Gathering was really interesting. It's helped me a lot with like self-love and situating myself and my weirdness within like the structures of society. Like I never wanted to be married because I just hated like all the structures and traditions and implications of marriage, and that's like its own little rant. But like the book, like The Art of Gathering, helped me to realize like the different ways you can be in community. You can make like your own new structures, or like the structures that there are, you can also like reclaim them in your own ways. And I think I've shut myself off in life a lot because I wasn't gelling with like the ways that I thought things should be, and then I just didn't partake. And I'm pretty shy as well, so another one of those books was called like Belong. And I've moved a lot in the last few years, and it's been hard to like constantly like find friends and remake them, and I've relied a lot on like friendships in the past as well, and I'm trying to be like more intentional in the future about, you know, where I show up and what spaces I'm involved with, and be less shy and less like squirreling away and more putting myself out there. I don't know if I would ever say like this book saved my life, but those books were helpful to me in becoming who I am within like the past few years. So the next book is Don't Turn Out the Lights. The first book that gave you chills. I do remember like being drawn to a lot of books like that were horrific as a kid, but like not reading them. Like I remember seeing the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark and thinking that was like the scariest thing I'd ever seen, and it like stayed in my mind. But you know, I never read any of those things. And then at one point my aunt tried to give me like some Stephen King books, and my parents were like, no, like she's gonna be scared, especially since I like sleepwalk and sleep talk. So, and I always have nightmares, so it's a thing. Like I'll be running around. But yeah, so my point is like there were a lot of times where it was just like this like tension towards these books, like, and I never read them. And then I don't know, when I think it was like college era, when I read the 13th Tale, which is sitting on my shelf right over there. And that was a really like good first step into horror, I think, because I don't even know if it's considered horror or like a thriller, but you know, like some of the thrillers I'd read in the past were just like straight thrillers, and I liked them, but like I didn't feel like this is like me. But when I read that book, it was like one of my favorite books at the time. I think there's like a writer that is trying to discover this mystery and is writing a book and is somehow in like some kind of like gothic setting or like old spooky house. And so it's all of those elements combined. So that was the first book that, you know, like stayed with me and was it just had like a very creepy, eerie feel throughout the book. And I'm so happy that I read that book. And maybe I should reread it. The next category is called Can I Get My Time Back, Please? The first book that made you angry. So this is probably not the first, but I just was thinking of this book as like probably the most angry a book has made me. There's just, you know, a lot of books like that I've read and been like, ooh, like why did I read that? Or looking back, I'd be like, oh, I read that because it's on a list somewhere of great books and it just wasn't to my taste, and why did I do that? But the book that wasted my time the most was actually me and my brother Tristan, shout out if you're watching this. We were driving to a music festival, Panorama, so we wanted to, I think this was like when I was getting into reading again, and I was like, ooh, let's like be scholarly and listen to a book the whole time. It's called The 13th Hour by Richard Deutsch. I had to look at it because I didn't remember. I think like I just like went into the library, picked something off the shelf. I had read 13th Tale. I'm like, okay, 13th, creepy. We got a new vibe going here. And this was a thriller, but it was horrible. I think I learned the lesson of like, oh, white male authors don't always, write the best about women. And I know this book like definitely had that aspect. So like the writing was bad, the women were written poorly, and to top it all off, the plot was boring. We were both really angry that we were listening, but we felt so bad because it was an audiobook, and like I'm sure if you listen to audiobook, they're like hours of time. So, and I don't know, I don't DNF too much because I don't know. Like I want to say that I read the book, and if the book, wasted my time, then I want to be able to like at least claim that I read a book during that time, and then be able to say, oh, this book is horrible. Just like something that like my brain gets hung up on. Where like for instance, I want to get rid of Goodreads because of Amazon, but I'm like, I haven't met my goal for the year yet, so like I want to finish that before I move on, which is really petty, but it's just how I think. And anyways, this book sucked, and I felt bad because like my brother isn't a reader, and it was really cool that we were, listening to this together, and then it was a bad experience. So like just a typical thriller, and like there's some aspect of like time or time travel or something, which was why I was interested in it. But the main character was boring too, so just all bad things. I don't need to talk about it any further. Don't read it. So the next category is out of your comfort zone. The first book that made you fall in love with a genre you hadn't explored before. And I think I kind of talked about this with a few books before this, but another book I would say like within the past year that helped me transition the way I think about anti-racist readings is, I was reading a lot of these like white fragility and, the type, like all the most popular books relating to racial justice. And, I'm still gonna keep reading those things, but I think like when I was reading those books, I was longing for more. I think like memoir and personal experiences are very valuable, but like for some of these books that we're saying, like basic history that I already knew, like I wanted more from the books, and that's kind of my fault, but I wanted like thoughts about how to move forward, more like in-depth look at systems. So I think like one of the first books I read was after I watched like a Haymarket video about teachers and abolition, and it's called We Want to Do More Than Survive by Bettina Love. That like very small transition from, anti-racist reading to abolitionist readings was really important to me. In terms of horror, I think two books that were really important to me were Horror Noire, which is a history of Blackness in horror, both, being used as a trope and how relating to how Blackness informs like what people are afraid of and monsters that were created in movies, and also just like how the role of Black characters evolved and is still evolving in horror movies. So that was really interesting, and like one of the first times I was able to combine horror with my love of history, which is cool, and also In the Dream House as a book that got me more into the horror genre. When I first started reading again after college, I was reading mostly contemporary fiction and bestsellers, and I think I was liking those, and there were definitely some books that I loved in those categories that I found, but also I think books like In the Dream House kind of pivoted me further into the horror genre because they were you know, doing multiple things. And right now, I have been reading some, you know, climate fiction for the first time and getting more into speculative fiction and climate fiction. And so that's like a really recent first. I mean, I should put science fiction in that category before, because I think I always thought of science fiction as something that I had read in the past with a lot of world building that wasn't like really accessible or interesting to me, and then again like pivoting science fiction to like speculative fiction, climate fiction, I don't know, like little subgenres within it that were more interesting to me was like really helpful and interesting. I mean, when I saw the movie Annihilation, even though it's not a book, I think that was something that was really crucial for me to realize, like, no, science fiction is for me. Books like Sorrowland or The Seep, even though The Seep wasn't one of my favorite books because I think I liked the premise and the commentary more than the execution. But yeah, just like discovering books like that was a really crucial recent first for me, even though that first was only a few months ago. So the next category is Mirror Image, the first book that made you feel known. And as I talked about before in the video, like, I don't think there's ever been one book like this, but I hope to one day find that book. But I think in college it was definitely, and Olivia mentioned this too in her video, so I was laughing to myself because I was like, this book is gonna definitely be in my video as well. But that's The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. I think, you know, especially like as a young white girl whose bubble hadn't really been broken and exposed to you know, larger concepts yet, but knew that she was sad. Reading The Bell Jar was really important to me, and to the point where like I went to college, and actually Sylvia Plath went to Smith, and there's a bunch in the Smith archives of her work, and I was doing this project relating to memory and how we memorialize people, and like thinking about how she was memorialized at Smith and like what her legacy was, and you know, the good and bad parts of that. I could say that like The Bell Jar, actually that was the first history class that I took, and it, because again it was a roundabout way of studying history, I was like, ooh, memory sounds interesting. So yeah, even though The Bell Jar was important to me like personally and, you know, my journey with mental health, it was also important to connecting me to history and archives and things that I really enjoy today. The last category is Hop Aboard the Wayback Machine. The first book you reviewed on YouTube. So my first video was a TBR, haha, big surprise. But so this book was actually the first book that I listed on my TBR and the first book that I reviewed, and it is one of my favorite books that I read this year. Although I don't know what my favorites will look like, but I still know this is definitely gonna be in the top 10 regardless, and that's The Death of Vivek Oji. Obviously I've talked a lot about this and many people have, but just a wonderful book. I just realized I've kind of been like talking about myself and not really saying the plot of these books, but I think that this video is supposed to be about that too, about yourself and how books have affected you. So hopefully this is interesting, and you know, even if I didn't give enough information about the books, you feel like you got to know me a little bit. Do you have any answers to these questions that you feel strongly about? I would love to hear in the comments below, especially a book that was special to you or a book that you want to trash. So in terms of tagging, thank you Olivia again for tagging me. So exciting, and I would like to tag Noire from Noire's Bookshelf and Kate from Pages and Prose. I would love to see you guys do this, but obviously no pressure. And anyone else who wants to do it, please do. And thank you so much for watching the video. Bye!